Hello, and welcome back to Game Domain. Today we'll be ranking the top 10 platformers released in 2017. This year saw an abundance of great platform games, including some re-releases, some spiritual successors, and some truly unique and innovative games. Let's start with number 10, Sonic vs. Sega. This is the first of two Sonic games to make our list, so it's obviously not even the best Sonic game Sega released this year. In general, the Sonic franchise has suffered from a tepid response to many of its latest installments. Forces fits that mold. It's another Sonic game, and we all know what that entails: collecting rings, going fast, racing to the right side of the screen. It's not that Forces is a bad game per se, it just feels like more of the same. It's pretty, and does a good job of making the backgrounds attractive to look at, even as they blur by. It incorporates both 2D and 3D elements, which they've done before, and even has a character creation element that adds a little bit of flair. But mostly, it's just a flat, riskless story that didn't make me feel invested in the gameplay. So if you like Sonic games, there's fun to be had in Forces, but it doesn't take many chances or try to do anything new. Number 9, Ukulele Playtonic Games. Ukulele is a pretty unapologetic spiritual successor to Banjo-Kazooie. From the two animal companion main characters to the hyphenated string instrument based name, Ukulele sets out to tap into our nostalgia. It does an admirable job of recreating the feeling of playing a 3D platformer in the 90s. But unfortunately, it suffers from a lot of technical problems we really should have escaped in the intervening 20 years. Bad camera angles and generally erratic camera movements make the cautious practice of platforming difficult. The controls can be equally difficult to get down. Ukulele is a fun game to fire up, just to experience the nostalgia and meet the clever, charming characters. But its wonky controls, jumpy camera, and general lack of polish landed at the bottom of our list in 2017. Number 8, Knack 2, Japan Studio. Knack 2 is a clever game with novel mechanics that just missed the mark. You play as Knack, who has the ability to pull artifacts to himself to make himself bigger, or shed them to make himself smaller. I didn't notice any appreciable difference in the combat, but it tends to be important for problem solving. For example, getting into tight spaces. The combat feels tactical, is paced well, and is just fun in general. That's what makes it vanilla. Bland story, so disappointing. Knack 2 has a skeleton of a good game, in the form of satisfying combat and artifact gathering, but fails to flesh out any meaningful story to capitalize on it. Number 7, Hob, Runic Games. Hob is a beautiful game that pulls you in without saying a word. Really, the game is nearly devoid of text. The screens that explain some of your items are the only words to be found. It draws fair comparisons to The Legend of Zelda. Looking at it, you will notice a similarity between Hob's world and the Spirit of the Wild. The lush world transitions from ancient technology to lush grass and twisting vines. It looks like a steampunk civilization abandoned their society, and nature has been slowly reclaiming it. What really sets this world apart is the fact that the levels themselves are puzzles. Interacting with the environment will cause pieces of the landscape to move and shift and change the way you look at your surroundings. It does suffer from the age-old problem of occasionally poor camera angles, and has some frame rate drops, but the world is too beautiful, and the adventure of exploring a world that is a puzzle in itself are too tempting to pass up. Number 6, Sonic Mania, Sega. As I said with Sonic Forces, the Sonic franchise has seen some hard times lately. Each new installment in the series has drawn mixed reviews. The complaints often sound something like, "It's not as good as the original." After years of trying new things in the Sonic franchise, Sega seems to have shrugged and replied, "If the originals are what you love, then that's what you'll receive." Sonic Mania feels more like an update or a reskin than a new game. From the second the home screen loads, nostalgia blasts you in the face. The 16-bit look, the music, it's all so familiar. So 90s. It doesn't stop there. The gameplay is smooth, but looks like a brighter, more colorful, and more polished original Sonic game. It's a very enjoyable walk down memory lane, complete with 3 familiar playable characters: Sonic, Tails, and Knuckles, facing off against their familiar foe, Dr. Eggman. If you enjoyed the original Sonic games, you'll like Mania. It's a good game, but a lack of innovation had me feeling like I played a really thorough fan restoration project. Number 5, Little Nightmares, Tarsier Studios. Did you sleep well last night? How about in your younger days, when the furnace kicking on in the basement sounded like a monster roaring to you? Little Nightmares is a platforming game that goes fairly light on the platforming and puzzle solving and leans more heavily on the tapping into fears many of us felt as children. It is something of a horror/suspense game built around the skeleton of a platformer. It lacks traditional speech, favoring instead grunts and mumbling to convey messages. Similarly, the game doesn't rely on obvious exposition, so much as a mystery you're trying to resolve as you explore the heavily atmospheric game. I was really impressed with how faithful the game stuck to childhood fears. It could have gone with more primal fears or typical phobias, such as snakes, spiders, or the sense that you left your oven on as your plane is about to take off. But it plays off of the nightmares for which the game is named. The atmosphere is oppressive and builds tension and suspense with each new area. The gameplay isn't the most robust, and many likely will not find it particularly challenging. I, however, loved running through the game, which is oversized to give you the feeling of a child in a world full of big, strange things. Don't expect to jump out of your seat and scream, but do expect to sit on the edge of your seat, tense, positive that you're going to get caught any second by any of the game's fantastical and ghoulish enemies. Number 4. Crash Bandicoot Insane Trilogy, Naughty Dog, Vicarious Visions. Crash Bandicoot was my game when I was a kid. I loved Mario as much as the next kid, but I had a PlayStation, and I logged more hours with Crash than I care to count. When I got my hands on the re-release of the first 3 games in the franchise, I was ecstatic. They had made it look and sound as beautiful as I remembered it. Viewing the original side by side with the remastered game, though, confirms what I instinctively knew. It wasn't this pretty in the 90s. No, they polished every inch of the game I loved so much. The soundtrack, which has always been catchy, is clean and delightful. There's an amazing depth to the colors, and there's so much more detail now. Gone are the jagged edges you remember or willfully forget from the original PlayStation. The game plays exactly like it did back then though. It starts pretty simple and straightforward, jumping and spinning your way through valley after valley of enemies. But the second and third games increase the complexity and difficulty. Considering this is just a remake of the original games, it doesn't get marks for creativity. It does, however, get an A+ grade from me for its execution of polishing up an old favorite, and a spot at number 4 on my list. Number 3, A Hat in Time, Gears for Breakfast. Kickstarter helped us bring A Hat in Time, an adorable game that is very much in the mold of Super Mario 64. In terms of gameplay, it doesn't take too many chances. Your basic controls, such as the double jump, will feel familiar right away. It's worth noting though, just how smooth the controls feel. Like the familiar controls, the objectives feel just as natural. Naturally, navigate the world, solve the puzzles, and gather the collectibles. A Hat in Time takes that familiar foundation and pours cute, clean gameplay over it. The name of the game is literally Hat. So don't be surprised if you find yourself crafting hats out of the materials you gather to create hats that grant you special powers. The one I feel comfortable talking about here is the Sprint Hat, which, among other benefits, allows you to move through the world more quickly. When you hear that A Hat in Time was funded by Kickstarter, you may be apprehensive. Don't worry though. This game is well written and well rounded. Issues with camera angles, typical in 3D platformers, have been addressed. There's humorous writing, and each area you explore has its own distinct feel and will draw you in. A Hat in Time doesn't aim to reinvent the wheel. It may be a bit short on inventiveness, but it's long on charm. This is a fun game with a classic feel. Number 2, Cuphead Studio MDHR. A game that deserves a spot on this list for its style alone, Cuphead is a playable work of art. If you're old enough to remember Saturday morning cartoons, and I mean the classics like Tom and Jerry, Popeye the Sailor, and old school Mickey Mouse, the style of this game will evoke some pretty powerful nostalgia. Cuphead is also likely to trigger some nostalgic feeling of running gun games such as Contra, as that is the closest parallel to its gameplay. It's basically a series of created boss battles separated by classic side-scrolling levels and bullet hell levels, typified by dodging a screen full of enemy projectiles. Everything you've heard about Cuphead is true. It's as beautiful as it is unforgiving. It's an adorably drawn, lovingly handcrafted Dark Souls. It lacks checkpoints and other resources of information that would be helpful in any shooter, such as how powerful your various weapons are. These missing gameplay elements definitely affect my enjoyment of the game. Since soul-crushing boss battles have stymied me since I was a child, but it's such a unique and appealing game I had to keep playing. and beating a boss after dozens of attempts always feels like an accomplishment. This game is overflowing with beautifully animated scenery and enemies, and is scored with equally period-appropriate big band music. It's a great, creative experience that I highly recommend. Number 1. Super Mario Odyssey, Nintendo. I couldn't do a top platformers list without a Mario game. Well, I suppose I could have if there hadn't been a Mario game released in this calendar year. Anyway, no one is surprised to see Super Mario Odyssey on this list. The Mario franchise continues to churn out classics with each new installment on each new console, and Odyssey is no exception. The latest installment in the franchise that defined the genre, it immediately has the feel of its 3D platforming predecessors, and includes some really clever nods to them and the rest of the Mario universe, including cleverly incorporated 2D areas that remind me of my Game Boy, but play with physics and challenge the rules as we knew them in 2D Mario games. You're also likely familiar with the game's most creative mechanic, Cappy, Mario's sentient hat that possesses the power to possess items and characters in the game. It's a simple concept on the surface, but it opens up a world of problem-solving techniques. Besides its obvious benefits as a conduit into the souls of Goombas, it also serves as a tool to perform various other tricks like double jumping and being a boomerang to collect coins. Odyssey seems to have taken from Super Mario Galaxy in terms of completing the game. I won't spoil anything, but you can beat the game fairly quickly and easily. But when I say beat the game, I mean you reach a resolution in the main plot. But then you can review areas to find new unlockables and new areas altogether. There are hundreds of collectible items, but you don't need to collect them all to resolve the plot, so you can return to continue to hunt them all down. As always, we'd love to hear your thoughts on our rankings, even if it's just to argue the validity of putting Crash Bandicoot, an actual remake, over Sonic, a game that just felt like a remake. Let us know what you think should be higher, what should be lower, what should be added, and what should be augmented. Thank you for watching.